I would like to welcome to the show Marta Spirk, wife, mother, TEDx speaker, author, marketing strategist, and fellow podcaster. Welcome to the show, Marta. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great.
So, just doing a little bit of research on you, I know that you left your country of Brazil and you had to leave your family, your culture, everything that you were so used to. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and what made you decide to do that?
Yeah, from a young age, I was very drawn to the American culture and the language. Obviously, there's a lot of American influence with movies, with music, in Brazil. But I actually like took it up a notch, as I do with everything in life. And I was very upset. So I started teaching English when I was 14. Like friends from school, from church, they knew it was something that I really liked and was good at. And I already from a young age knew that I could, leverage the skills that I had and turn it into a business. I didn't know that that's what I was doing, but that's what it started with. And a lot of this desire to be in America was also fostered by the fact that my mom is a pastor and she started her church in Brazil with the guidance of an American minister from Oklahoma. And we started coming to conferences at his church back in the early 2000s. And that's where I met my husband. So I met him in a church conference in 2005. And we were essentially dating long distance for a few years until we decided that, we were either going to get married or we're going to say, forget it. And I decided that I wanted to give it a shot. Obviously, it was very hard on my parents. And now as a mom myself, I understand the resistance. But my 20-ish year old self did not care about the risk or how crazy it sounded. And that's what I did. I moved because of love, obviously, but also because it was something that I had had in my heart for a while.
So it sounds that you were drawn. There was a
Mhm.
calling,
Yes,
and you
totally.
followed your calling.
I really did.
Now, as the show is about the obstacles and opportunities, you talked about a couple of the opportunities and the fact that love brought you together,
Yeah.
brought you to America, but you had other wishes, other dreams. Can you talk about maybe some of the first obstacles you might have come across when you moved to America?
Yeah. So it's interesting because although I was very passionate about the culture, obviously you're never really prepared for the shock or for the adjustment until you're in it. There's, and that's with anything in life. You can read all the books, but you're only going to actually experience what it is in real life and in practice. And that was a lot of it too. Even though I chose it, it wasn't something that was imposed upon me. That's not to say that it wasn't difficult adjusting to the lifestyle. Obviously, there were many things that I enjoyed and that I am very grateful for, to the point where we lived in Brazil after being married for a few years. And I was the one that said, I would like to move back to America sooner than later because I had adapted to the culture more so than my own culture, which I still love, but in terms of choices, that's what I chose. So that was tough in some aspects, and I think also being in a relationship with someone that I hadn't been around for very long, it was a long distance relationship. We didn't really have a normal quote unquote dating
Mm.
relationship where you get to know each other, you go to the movies and then you go back to your house, the regular. We never did that. We talked on the phone, through the internet. We met in person a few times a year, but then the married life is very, very different, especially for me, not only coming from a conservative Latin family, but I had an older sister. I was never around boys a whole lot, and then all of a sudden I am living in a house with a man that has cousins and brothers and friends, and I'm just, this woman there. So it was quite the rude awakening, because something else about Brazilian culture is most people, they live, and I think with many Latin cultures, most people live with their parents until they get married. Very different from the American culture of, you go to college, you're pretty much on your own, you start paying your bills, do your laundry, all the things. I did that with marriage. So I didn't have, the let's go live on campus as an 18-year-old and start, cooking microwave meals. I never did any of that before. So it was quite the shock to become my own adult, but with another adult. So it wasn't like I had my independent experience. So those were definitely challenges. And then I could speak to more recent challenges with having kids. So in 2016, I had triplets, and having children, as you know, is a challenge in its own, a challenge through to the relationship to marriage, a challenge to you as a person, because it's like you're forced to grow up all of a sudden. And for me, with having three kids at the same time, it was a reality that, again, I was not prepared for. Nobody could ever be prepared for one child, let alone three. And yeah, so that was something else, and it's an ongoing thing, because as they're growing, new challenges arise, and I'm facing them all at the same time with them and their uniqueness and their personality. So that's some, to name a few.
Oh, I'd say that's a gift, but 3 times. So
Yeah.
children sort of they ground us. They make us look at what's most important to us.
Mm.
And yeah, it does changes the relationship. It changes how much time you have.
Yeah.
Um, and 3 of them. Wow. That must have been interesting. Now, I read a quote of yours, and I think this is really I think a lot of people should listen to this quote, and they should use it rather than frown upon things. So the quote is, "I've learned to reframe mistakes into lessons." So I always say, never be afraid to try something.
Mhm.
I think failure comes from not trying,
Yes.
not from trying and failing. So that's and what would you say to that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I've learned, especially in my adult life, and especially after having children and starting my business, that I don't really even believe in failure, um, in the traditional meaning of the word, because it's really an opportunity. Like you're tried something, now you know where not to go, or this is not the path. I mean, it's really like a GPS. You started going down that route, it's not that great, it's not where you wanted to go, but now you know. So it's insight, and now you get to course correct and go somewhere else. So was it really a waste of your time? No, it wasn't, because you learned something new about yourself and about life in the process. And for me, I think this is one of the big pieces of my message now as a person, because I'm very competitive. And that's another thing, another reason why I resonated with the American culture so much, is because obviously I like to be a performer. I like to be in front of people. I like to put on a show. I mean, all the basic stereotypes of American culture, I embody.
Mm.
So that's why, this was the place for me. But then there's a downside of that. What happens when you don't win? What happens when you are not first place? And those are things that you may not really consider as you're striving for your goal, but they will happen. These things will happen. So how do you deal with them? That's what the way you receive those challenges, right? And how you react to them is what's going to set you up for your next step, right? Because if you dwell on how hard that was, then what is your next step? As opposed to, if you take that into account as insight for your next move, then you pick yourself back up and then you create another plan. So that's really what I mean by they are lessons, is that I've learned that in my life, I can't really mess it up. And this is the message that I want to impart to my kids and to everybody that I come across, is I've come to this realization, and it's something that you have to do for yourself. And it's ongoing. There's different layers, right? And pieces to this. But whenever I hit a point where I feel disappointed in myself or in the situation, things didn't work out the way that I had planned, I have the choice to look at this and still have a positive outlook, right? And still decide, okay, so what do I get to do right now? What can I do then, since this didn't work out? And that's the lesson.
And I think that is true. Like again, I don't like the word failure. Um, the idea of, as you said, dissect what you just did, take it to positive. Um, Certain things we do in life may not be, if we go down a path, it may not be our path. It might be a detour, so you have to go somewhere else. But again, uh, if you didn't try, you wouldn't know. So I
Exactly.
believe in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you talked to us earlier about being a mom of triplets. Now, I want to know how you manage to do all that you do and be a mother at the same time. So work-life balance has got to be very important to you. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. So, for one, I feel like it's very much a part of my personality to do several things at the same time and really enjoy doing them. Like, it's not that somebody is imposing it upon me. I really like being busy or being abundant, because some people think busy is a negative thing. So I like the abundance of things, and that's why I believe that I was entrusted with three kids at the same time. That's what actually one of the things that I remember crying to my sister on the phone when I told her, and she said, and it always makes me emotional just thinking about it. She said, if anyone can do this, Marta, which is having triplets, is you. So it's just part of who I am. But obviously it's not easy, and there was resistance from my family when I decided to start my business, because from the outside in, people are concerned. This is your new responsibility. They depend on you. Make sure you're not make sure you're prioritizing what is a priority in your life. And what I understood early on that people, I think, did not understand because they're not me, or they're not in my shoes, is that I could not fully be present for them if I wasn't also taking care of myself, if I wasn't also thinking about what I needed. And that is maybe very counterintuitive for most moms or for most women. And again, everyone's different, everyone's realities are different. But I knew early on that I needed to pursue my own dreams and my own desires. And I think that that is a huge part, again, of my message, is saying that it is possible if it is a desire that you have. It's not that you should have this desire, but if it is something that is inside of you, don't let guilt or shame, whether it is from you or from others, prevent you from pursuing these things. So yeah, balance is elusive. I don't really know that there is such a thing. There are times when you're going to be paying more attention to one thing than the other, and that's the challenge, and that's the game, I guess. That's the dance.
Well, I think the thing too is as your daughters grow up, or you could tell the children they can do anything,
Yeah.
and don't always listen to people from the outside because, again, like you said, they don't know what's in those four walls.
Yes, exactly.
And I think honestly that a lot of that might come from tradition, what people over time believe that
Yes,
your
definitely.
mother, you need to be at home, you need to be concentrating on the children, you need to be looking after the house. And I'm a believer that it's a 50-50. So there's two people in a relationship,
Yes.
and if children involved, split everything 50-50. Now, certain things mothers can do that fathers can't do, but
Right.
there are
And vice
things.
versa.
So, yeah, so it's something you can instill in your children that, don't always listen to those people on the outside, whether it be family or friends or people you don't even know, because everybody's has an opinion,
Yes, they
unfortunately.
do. Yes, they do.
I want to move on a little bit. There's a little blue book behind you, and I would like you to talk a little bit about that book and what inspired you to write that book.
Yeah. So early on, when I started my business, I was very inspired, obviously, by other people that do something similar, that are motivational speakers, that, are life coaches, that help people with their mindset, and pursue their dreams. And many of them are authors as well. In fact, I remember when I was reading one of my first personal development books, by Brendan Burchard, and I had this idea or this vision or this desire. It was like one of the first moments that I remember of thinking, how do I get to do this? How did this guy get to do this? How does one become this? And I remember even telling my husband, he's like, oh man, it's going to take you years for you it's not like you're going to just become this
Yeah.
person. And I understand his point, but I also thought, well, then I better get to it. I better start somewhere. And that was like back in 2017. So my kids were barely a year old, and I was already thinking, this is what I would like to do. And then in getting into the industry, meeting other people that were just getting started or wasn't as far along as, for example, Brendan Burchard and all the other people, Tony Robbins, all of them, I started seeing that other people get to do this too. You don't have to, and I've been saying this a lot, you don't have to win an Oscar to publish a book. You don't have to win an Oscar to go on stage and share your message. And we have this image, right? Because whenever we haven't done something, it's impossible until we do it, right?
Yeah.
So it's just in that dream realm, the fantasy of, wow, what would it take for me to publish a book? Because then we start thinking, well, I need to be a New York bestseller. No, that's not a prerequisite, for you to actually become an author. So as I started understanding that, it became more within my reach. And I remember one of my business coaches had published 9 books, and he said, you need to publish a book. So it started becoming more real to me, like, wow, I get to do this. This little old Brazilian girl gets to eventually publish something. So what would I talk about? And that's when I started thinking about, what is the message? What have I already been sharing in my programs, in my content? And it's so interesting because a lot of my resistance to publishing it, which I now know it's a lot of aspiring authors' resistance, is I'm not ready. The message is not ready, because you almost feel like then you go from who am I to then I'm not there yet, so you create all these obstacles in your mind thinking it needs to be this canon of my life. It needs to be this Bible of the messages. And it's like, no, it'll grow with you, and you get to publish a second book and a third book if you'd like. So all these things started going through my mind, and I decided, well, I don't think it's going to be a super long thing. That way it doesn't take me very long to write. It doesn't take me very long to edit and publish it. So it ended up, it is now a 100 and some page book with 5 chapters plus the intro and conclusion. And it's what I call the path towards empowerment. So it's called The Empowered Woman, the Ultimate Roadmap to Business Success. And like my business coach says, it could easily be the empowered man as well, because it's for everybody. The focus is business, but I've heard feedback from so many people that said, even if you're not an entrepreneur, these are foundational principles of self-discovery, self-acceptance, and really empowering yourself to go fulfill your purpose. So that's what it's about.
I'll be sure to include a link to where they can find that book in the show notes. I think, like you said, it could be for man or woman.
Yes.
Just follow the steps.
Yes.
Now, I understand that you're also a podcaster.
I am.
And how is the podcast going for you?
Oh my gosh, I'm going to be celebrating 5 years of the show in June of this year, 2023. And it's crazy to think that it was one of those decisions that I kind of was like, yeah, why not? But I had no idea that I was going to stick with it for very long, especially being in this journey for this long and seeing all the people that started, paused, continued, or completely stopped, or rebranded, did all the things. I'm really proud of myself for sticking with it, because it was my initial intention was, I need to have somebody listen to me, and I need to talk. That was really what it was, to gain clarity on what I say. And then in the process, I understood, oh, I'm going to meet new people this way. This is a new way, a different way for me to network and leverage people's audiences. They can leverage mine. So my show will grow because I will have guests on, and this will help me with my content and in growing my business as well. But it's become so much more. Like I've learned how to interview. I've learned how to be interviewed, and these are skills, right? The more you do it. So some people have no idea that it's something that it's not that you just go and you do it, right? I mean, you got to start that way, but you become better and better at it. And I know that having a podcast has helped me with my speaking. It has, I mean, I have clients that are just starting out and they're like, oh, you just said that so beautifully. And I tell them, friend, it's been years of me, thinking about a concept and communicating, articulating it. It's all practice. So I know it's been an amazing tool for exposure, but also for my own personal growth. It's called The Empowered Woman podcast, obviously, but I do have empowered men as guests as well, because men also empower women. And we talk about all sorts of topics pertaining to personal growth, to business, strategy, marketing, visibility, all the things.
Make sure there's a link in the show notes so people can listen to your podcast. Now, looking back at where you are today, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because I have referenced this type of question several times in my content as I talk about failure and lessons. And I say, I understand the sentiment behind that question, and I think it's a very valid question, but in many ways it could put you in a place of guilt too, right? Oh, I've made all these mistakes. So I would tell my 20-year-old self to not do that. And especially now, back to what I said, being a mom myself, having lived for several years now, and looking back, I wouldn't have listened. I wouldn't have listened. I would
Good
have done
answer.
I would have done the same thing because that's what I needed to do to get to where I am right now. So in terms of, regret advice, I wouldn't give any of them because again, I know I wouldn't listen because people tried. People tried to stop me. So even if it was me from the future, I don't know that I would listen to myself. Um, but I would probably be more in the empowering, obviously in the
Yeah.
empowering tone of saying, take the chances, do the things, because this exact opportunity may not show up later on in the future, or you will not be in this position again to take this chance again with me with marriage. I don't know that as a 36-year-old now living in Brazil that I would leave everything behind, but as a 23-year-old I did. you know so yeah, back to that one question, I would say go for it because yes, it's going to be scary. No one's telling you it's not going to be scary. I can't promise you that. In fact, I won't. But I will tell you that there's lots of lessons, rewards, and lots of joy from taking the leap.
I really like that answer. So thank you for that. As we end near this podcast today, which I probably think I could talk to you for hours,
Hey, I know. It's fun.
but these things, nobody wants to listen to a 3-hour podcast.
No, that's true.
What's in the future for Marta? Like, are you looking at another book, speaking engagements, any projects that you might want to share with our listeners?
All right. So a few of them, obviously I have more than one. Um, I haven't started it, but I do know that before I publish a new book, I do want to translate it into Portuguese. That's something that I would really like to do, potentially into Spanish and French as well, because I have an international audience, especially with the podcast. It's been surprising to see in the stats people listening to it, all over the world in Africa and Asia. So I know that they would benefit from from several translations eventually, with me being international too. So that's something I would love to get to do. And I've always loved doing live events. That's something that I wondered if we would ever get to do after the pandemic, but thankfully we have been able to. I've resumed in-person workshops that I was doing before the pandemic. And now with my business growth and just my personal growth, I want to continue doing that. And I do envision, especially for me, attending so many conferences growing up in church, that is a desire that I have. I know that my speaking, my singing, all the things that I do in terms of performance, it came from the experiences that I had in church. And I want to carry that through with the message that I have. So keep an eye out for larger conferences, national conferences, international conferences. I know it'll come about. I don't know when, but it's in my heart. So it's going to happen.
Thank you for that. What we'll do is there are many different places we can find you on the web, so I'll include those links. And I have one final question.
Okay.
I noticed a little pink guitar behind you.
Yes.
Is that yours?
It is. So something else that I've been learning about myself, and especially this year, I wanted to try new things. I'm always trying new things, and music is a huge part of my life. I rescued it a lot last year. I started doing like some gigs with bands, which I never thought I would do. I've been singing the national anthem at several sporting events and different events here in Denver, which that has been super fun. And I do see myself. So again, with the conferences and the events, I do want to incorporate music, not just, playing music, but me playing the music and me singing. I know that's going to be a part of it. And I've been playing the piano since my teens. So I started taking voice lessons then, and I've been playing the piano. Recently, a friend of mine moved and gave me her piano. So it's been something that I'm doing a lot that I hadn't done ever since having kids, because it's just there. So it's easy. And then a few weeks ago, because my mom plays the guitar. So that's what I grew up with, my mom singing and playing the guitar for her church. And then I picked up the piano because it's like, this is your thing, this is my thing. And then recently I started thinking, well, I want to carry on her legacy. I want my kids to be able to pick,
Hmm.
not that I have any aspiration of being a super guitarist extraordinaire, but I'll handle the singing and I'll just accompany it with some instrument, and I'm okay with that. So I recently purchased myself a guitar, and it's pink, obviously,
It
and I've been practicing.
Well, it's good to see. It's been very interesting speaking with you today. Uh, I know I've listened to your TEDx speech and our conversation, whatever you want to call it, but you're a good speaker, well spoken. Your podcasts are excellent. I haven't read the book yet. Something on my bucket list. So I have to get it and read it. And like you said, it might help me, might even help me help my wife. So I appreciate your time today, and I want to thank you for being on the podcast. And we will keep in touch because I know that Marta has so much more that she wants to do. She just needs some time.
Yes, that's right. It'll happen. Thank you so much, Randall.